He pulls us over. He has a little board, so he's showing us everything that we're going to see. And it's like, man, I'm just eating this stuff up. I'm thinking, man, I'm about to get out of college. I'm going straight to the military. And so they're showing us all this stuff. And so we're sitting, we're in the back. And so he's showing us what's going to happen. And so it starts to happen. So we see the I think they call them tracers. You can see the bullets. It's like fire going through the air. This isn't broad daylight. It's like fire going through the air. You can see the bullets. So they're shooting these bullets. You can see somebody throws a grenade. You can see the grenade blow up. And then you hear in the background. And then in the distance you see, boom, a big explosion. And so we're like watching all this. I'm like, yeah, this is, man, I want to just run down there in one of them bunkers or something. And so it was so cool. And then we heard, boom. And we saw an explosion. It was about maybe 75 yards away. And so I'm always watching. And so I didn't panic, but I was looking around to see if the other folk panicked. Not the people who are with me, but the soldiers. And when I saw the guy who was on the walkie-talkie or whatever his position is, I saw him panic. Now he didn't want, maybe the others didn't see it, but I watched him. When I saw, I thought in my mind, this is cool, but that was too close. I don't think that was supposed to happen. And so I found the guy, and he got immediately on the walkie-talkie, and he was talking to somebody, and he told them, obviously, that this bomb came too close. And so I looked at him, and he was cool, so I was cool. Listen. By the way, sometimes the enemy is hoisting bombs at us and they get real close. But you got to know that God is going to protect you. He is our protector, amen? Listen, that's why we need to go on our faces and get on our walkie-talkies and talk to somebody who's able to redirect the fire that the enemy is sending towards us. So as long, listen, God is not panicking in the midst of the storm. So we shouldn't panic. Amen? And so he told somebody something, and then we heard, and then the bombs were back out there where they were supposed to be. I forgot where I was now. Where am I? So the storm is coming. Sometimes we enter storms because we don't respond to godly rebukes. In verse 27, which takes me to my next point. Remaining in the storms, if you rid yourselves of the things that are not essential. Verse 27. Notice this again. In verse 21 it says, but when they had gone a long time, verse 27, but when the 14th night came, they've been in the storm for a pretty long time. But when the 14th night came, and as we were being driven along the Adriatic Sea about midnight, the sailors began to surmise that they were approaching some land. And they took surroundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. In other words, they had this rope on these ships. They had this rope and they would drop it. They'd have a weight on it and they would drop it all the way down to the bottom. And that's how they figured how deep the water was. And so as they kept sailing, they would drop this rope and it went from, I think it says it was 20 fathoms, and a little further on they took another sounding and found it to be 15 fathoms. So they were basically getting closer to shore. And so it says, in fearing that we might run aground somewhere on the rocks, they cast 4 anchors, and from the stern and wished for daybreak. So basically, they put the anchors out with the ship pointed toward the shore so that they would at least know what direction, because they can't see where they are. There's the storm, as the clouds are overhead and they can't see anything. So they're doing everything they possibly can to position themselves to live. It says in verse 29, fearing that we might run aground somewhere on the rocks, they cast 4 anchors from the stern and wishing for daybreak. But as the sailors were trying to escape from the ship and had let down the ship's boat into the sea on the pretense of intending to lay out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, listen, unless these men remain in the ship, you yourselves cannot be saved. Now hear me. When storms come, most folk are trying to find a way out of the storm. Even me. Now, I don't want to go through no storms. But there are times when the safest place in the time of a storm is on the ship. Paul tells them, listen, unless you remain on the ship, you're going to die. My wife's grandfather, my grandfather, we call him Papa. He died at 100 years old. And I remember, it makes me emotional thinking about him, because he was such a wise man. And I remember when we were going through a storm here at a Rising Star, and we would go down and we would see him, and he would always say to me, son, stay with the ship. Stay with the ship. I tell him, Papa, you know, man, it's crazy, you know, there's a north wind, there's an east wind, there's all kind of winds. There's a tsunami going on. Maybe you don't know. And he listened to me. He said, son, stay with the ship. Stay with the ship. There were times when I was going to leave here, and I can hear his voice in my mind saying, stay with the ship. And I'm saying to you this morning, listen, there are times when you think the best thing to do is to get your stuff and go. But I'm telling you, if you stay with the ship, God will get you to the other side. Verse 33 says this, until the day was about to dawn, Paul was encouraging them all to take some food, saying, today is the 14th day that you have been constantly watching and going without eating, having taken nothing. Therefore, I encourage you to take some food, for this is your preservation. And for not an hair from your head will perish. Having said this, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of all, and broke it and began to eat. And so Paul has a meal with them. He encourages them. He says, listen, not a hair from the head of any of you will perish, but that is contingent upon them staying with the ship. So he took some bread and he broke it and he ate. And it says in verse 36, all of them were encouraged, and they themselves also took food. All of us in the ship were 276 persons. When they had eaten enough, they began to lighten the ship by throwing out the wheat into the sea. That's like throwing away money. But again, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? What is wheat compared to life? says, so they were encouraged. First lesson we learn, majority rule is not always the best rule. Secondly, storms help us to rid ourselves of the things that are not important. Thirdly, sometimes we enter storms because we don't respond to godly rebukes, but God still comforts. Number 4, remaining in the storm helps you to rid yourself of the things that are essential. And so I talked about the things that are not important, but it also helps you understand the things that are important, requisite. And then lastly, in verses 39 through 44, you learn a lesson that relying on God through the storms has its rewards. He says, when day came, they could not recognize the land. Seemed like things were just the way they were the day before. That's the tough thing about storms, is things look the same. Quite often our outlook is the same when we're going through storms, and one day looks just like another day. And it doesn't look like God is doing anything. You've prayed all night. You've lost a whole lot of sleep. And you wake up and it seems like nothing has changed. And so what do? It says they could not recognize the land, but they did observe a bay with a beach. And they resolved to drive the ship into it if they could. And casting off the anchors, they left them in the sea, while at the same time they were loosening the ropes of the rudders and hoisting the foresail to the wind, that they were headed for the beach. But striking a reef, now, get this, now they see that they're headed, they can see a beach. Seems like things are getting better. Headed toward beach, right? They think, man, we're going to make it now. Verse 41. But striking a reef, doggone it. Seems like if it ain't one thing, anybody ever been there? He said, and people say stuff like, well, they say things come in threes. You ever heard stuff like that? Yeah, you say, yeah, they must do because I'm on my 4th one. So that means 2 more coming along. He says they're striking a reef. They were 2 seas met. They ran a vessel aground and the prows stuck fast and remained immovable. So in other words, the boat was stuck on a reef. It says, but the stern began to be broken up by the force of the waves. So now they could see the shore, and now the boat is stuck, and the waves began to break the boat. In verse 42, the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners so that none of them would swim away and escape. And so now these centurions, they're looking at all of these prisoners, and they understand that their lives is my life. So if any of them escape, then I die, the death that they would die. So they, knowing that they're going to die, they says, listen, we might as well kill them all before they escape. In verse 43, but the centurion, wanting to bring Paul safely through, kept them from their intention and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land. Now, you talk about God's provision. Now they get to see about this God that Paul was talking about in action. In verse 44, and the rest jumped over. It says they followed, some on planks and others on various things from the ship. So all the stuff that seemed to be important on the ship, they were now floats to get to shore. and the rest should follow, and some planks and others on various things from the ship. And so it happened that they all were brought safely to land. You need to understand this morning that God is going to bring you safely through. Whatever storm you're in, God is going to bring you safely through. In the midst of your storm, you need to figure out what it is that's important and what's not important. And you need to trust that God will get you to the other side safely. Father, we pray and thank you, O God, for your word that has shown us that storms will come. But we thank God that